All right, well, good morning everyone, and welcome back again to the KSR YouTube channel, where it's some more progress on Val and Steve Morris's Camaro. Ricky's just making all kinds of racket over there while I'm trying to film. Golly. Yeah, you're right. You're making the shop money, and I'm just over here talking to a camera box. But anyways, maybe wondering why we're still working on this when we're waiting on a chassis inspection. Well, there's more things that need to be done to the car, so we might as well keep moving on it. You know, as soon as we got the body off and we finished the welding on the job, I contacted my local NHRA inspector. He's got to fit us into his schedule, and like I didn't want to plan it too early because, you know, then it turns into us having to rush it, and we didn't want to make any mistakes. So I think, well, I know the chassis is ready for inspection, but we've got some things that we're doing that I'm going to show you that are just stuff that need to be done once we start assembling the car, and actually before the car goes to powder coat. So as usual, let's get through the intro and then we'll get into some more detail. So, one of the first things we've worked on, which Eddie did this before he left for Detroit. So Eddie's actually not here right now because this is Wednesday. And he flew out to Detroit where the Viper is at to service the Viper. And I will meet him in Mid-Ohio on Friday, where we will be at Mid-Ohio for the Trans Am race to support Lee again for this round of the Trans Am series. And then the following weekend, which is literally next weekend, Eddie and Lee will be at Road America in Wisconsin. So if you are in Mid-Ohio this weekend, let's see the date for that. I guess it's around the 20th. No, so we'll be there the 21st, 22nd, and 23rd. If you are in the Ohio area and want to come down and check us out. I know it's really close to a lot of places, but anyways, that's what we're doing this weekend. This is what we're doing right now. So Eddie got the mounts for the air tank, and then we have a pump coming in, the air pump, and we ended up upgrading the pump from what came in the kit. The pump that came in the kit was only good for 100 PSI, and we want to fire the parachutes with 150 PSI. So I ordered a pump that will go, that's rated for up to 200 PSI. So I know that working it in the 150, 160 PSI range will be no problem. So we've got the tank here. This tank is going to plumb directly out to the chutes with its shutoff valve on it, so you can push the air rams back in. And the rest of the features in the car, the air features, will be operated at probably 80 PSI, 60, 80, 100, you know, the automatic shifter, the boost control solenoids, the safety parachute release, all of those air operations will be regulated down to, you know, somewhere 60, 80, 100, nowhere near the 150 PSI, because you just don't need that much PSI to fire all these other accessories. So for those, we've got us a little industrial air pressure regulator here with a built-in gauge on it. Well, it's actually a screw-on gauge, but this is a air pressure regulator that I actually use on the dyno for when I'm using air pressure to control, to kind of work in place of CO2 so I don't waste a customer's CO2. It's worked pretty well for us in the past, but it's nice and easy to adjust. Maybe not so much one-handed, but literally you just pop this up. More pressure, less pressure. Put it back down, lock it, so that way it can't shake around and adjust itself while the car is, you know, going down the road, hitting bumps and vibrating and stuff. So I'm gonna take a couple more of these threaded inserts, put this dude right here, and then that can go out and be powder coated just like everything else. And we also fabricated a little mount for the Leash Electronics wiring board that's going to be operating the trunk features.
Yeah, that thing's sweet.
Good job, CJ.
Thank you.
CJ Sheet Metal made that. That's nice, and some nice thin sheet metal, but with the folds on it, it's nice and strong, but still lightweight.
CJ gets a gold star.
Gold star for CJ.
Yay!
So we'll have fuel pump, fuel pump, the street fuel pump, and then the air pump, and then we'll possibly the trailer brakes. Kind of was thinking that through, that maybe we'll make that. I don't know, because sometimes the trailer brakes, or the wiring for the trailer brakes is, we're at least going to wire the trailer plug for trailer brakes, just because why not? But some of those systems, I think, kind of ramp up the voltage. So if that's the kind of brake controller we set the thing up for, we wouldn't need the relay. But we haven't decided yet, and we may put 2 electric pumps in the tank, so that way, like say your street pump fails, well, you could easily just switch over to the other pump. And we'll wire all of these into the Holly, because we're actually going to have the air pressure in the air tank controlled by a sensor, and the Holly will then fire the relay to turn this on. So that way it's always maintaining air pressure, but only when the car is running. So that way we're not draining the battery down when the car's not running. And then it could even have a warning on the dash or some kind of error if there's no air pressure, so that, you know, before Val even makes a pass, if there's a red indicator on the dash that there's no air pressure in the air tank, she's going to know she's not going to have boost control, and the parachutes won't rocket out with the air launchers. So lots of little things to just consider when we're building this thing, to make sure that we have all the bases covered before we send this thing out to powder coat, as well as, you know, try and make it where it's kind of all encompassing for a lot of different options. Which brings us to our next point. And I think I touched on these last week, but we're setting the car up where it can accept some different weight bars. And this is just a, you know, a lightweight little piece of thin steel. Wouldn't be used for a weight bar, like we would use some heavy wall stuff. But we're working on setting our tabs up. And after thinking about things a little bit, I decided I wanted to replace this tab with a tab that's going to connect these 2 bars. So that way this, you know, the weight of all this tab, and this is that maybe overthinking stuff that I do, but let's just say worst case scenario, this thing gets to flipping. Well, I would prefer not to have a weight bar just in a single, you know, it only being welded on one end, and be able to possibly bend and break the tabs. So we're gonna just tie an extra tab, or tie this back tab up to there. The front we'll use the regular tab. And it's kind of overthinking stuff, because possibly this car doesn't even get weight bars in it. Like, that's only going to be for meeting some kind of class rules somewhere. But being as that we're powder coating the chassis, we want to kind of cover the bases with this stuff to give the option to run those, to run some weight bars in the car. And really with, you know, say 20 or 30 pounds, no problem. These tabs, when the single, you know, only the being welded on one side, would be perfectly okay. But if they end up stacking 50 pounds, 60 pounds, you know, an impact may have maybe 5 to 10 G's. So then that 50-pound weight becomes a 500-pound force trying to rip off these tabs, which it should take more than 500 pounds to rip one of these off. But depending on the kind of accident, like a peak G could be even higher than that. So I think it's going to be better to do that tab that connects up to there. And so that's kind of some of the thought process behind that whole deal, and why we don't have the weight tabs in it yet. The weight tabs don't have anything to do with the chassis cert. But, well, there are some NHRA rules for weights, but they're not a part of the chassis cert. But they need to be done before the car gets powder coated. So that's what we're doing. Another thing Eddie was working on before he left was the passenger seat mounts. So because this car may not always be a drag and drive car, and how we're setting the car up to be able to completely remove the street fuel system, you know, the street radiator will be able to be removed. Like say they want to get this thing as light as it can possibly be and go run some outlaw race somewhere. Well, you want to take all the passenger seat and all that stuff out too, because that's probably 40 pounds between the passenger seat, the seat belts, the mounts. So instead of making any kind of permanent mounts, we did some more threaded inserts into the bar, you know, the main chassis structure. And these, like that's what these bars here are actually for. That's going to weld in somewhere like that. It'll have a tab. Here, let me just do this. It'll have a tab coming off the front of it to bolt to that bottom part of the seat there. We are also going to incorporate the seat belt mounts onto this. We're tying all of that. That's 1 inch round bar there, which will be more than strong enough to mount the seat. The lap belts, the crotch belt will loop around the front bar. So the crotch belts will loop around there. And then back here for the harness bars, we're going to do a threaded insert right there and over here somewhere. And then it'll have a bar running across there that will tie in to somewhere on the back of the seat, as well as be an anchor point for wrapping the shoulder harnesses around that harness bar over here on the passenger side of the car. So lots of little things to think about. We want to make sure we get all the bases covered. Our mount for the fire bottle is going to be in, I think, tomorrow. So that won't be in this video, because I'm actually going to try and get this video out on Friday. That's the plan. But just wanted to give you guys an update on all kind of little things we got going on with this thing. We put electronics, one of the panels back in because we were working on the Mac valve that's going to control the automatic shifter. So it's going to mount to one of the electronics panels and be controlled by the ECU. The Mac valve for the parachute handle is going to end up back here somewhere, because the parachute cables are going to be coming back here. And then that way there won't be anything going up to, like no wiring going up to the parachute release handle. It will only be just the 2 parachute release cables and the air line that will fire that. If the ECU, our programming tells the ECU to fire the parachute thing, which maybe you saw my video about that a while back when I had my soccer mom near crash. And that way we've got the stuff worked out now to be able to have several neat safety parameters when it comes to firing the parachute. So different things like that we're working out. We put that seat back in because we want to match the angle of this seat over here, at least initially with that, as well as get it to where it's kind of a comfortable layback for the passenger. I'm gonna kind of set it up for me because Steve, I think, is similar to my height, so that'll Steve and Kyle, so that either one of them could ride in the car with Val on the trip. And yeah, I'm trying to think of what else. I guess I should probably stop. I guess I could stop yammering on and actually get to doing some work. So let's crank up the time lapse and get to work doing some stuff, and then we'll talk to you guys again here in just a little bit.
All right, so it's time to start the time-lapse portion of this video. And, just like what we've done in some of the other spots, we're going to center punch the tube on the out side of its diameter, like on the horizontal plane of the tube there, where it will bolt up to this mount that's going to be for the air pressure regulator. So we get the holes drilled, go ahead and put some bolts into the 1/4-28 jet nuts. And the reason that I thread the bolts into them is, it's got a couple of reasons. One of them is so that I can make sure that the nuts are pushed into the tubing on the same plane. You know, I don't have one of the jet nuts facing up, one of them facing down, because if they're not on the same plane, well, the piece that gets bolted in, it's going to try and twist it. And not only that, it just doesn't look good if they aren't parallel or square to each other. The other aspect is to act as a heat sink, so that when I'm welding around it, it's not trying to completely melt the side of this little tiny nut off, because the nut is transferring heat into the bolt, and you know, it just all kind of works out. So I go ahead and bolt it back up here once I've slightly enlarged the holes in the slots on that little mounting bracket there. And now it's time to continue on with the dash mounting. So a while back I did the little threaded inserts, or the jet nuts, under the top of the forward X bar, and I had the plans to, you know, fabricate, I kind of call it like a mounting tree, and that's going to not only connect the upper parts of the tree, which there's not really any structural intention there, it's more for just laying a tube across the bottom of the dashboard and then putting a receiver plate for a Zeus fastener. It's going to be what the spring for the Zeus fastener rivets to, so that way it holds that bottom flap of the dash so that the dash is mounted nice and secure. Now on the top part there, it catches in the bottom of the windshield channel, so that kind of, you know, deals with that. So there is only going to be 4 Zeus fasteners that hold this dash in. And just as a reminder, the dash itself is not going to have the screen mounted to it. So 4 fasteners and you'll be able to take this fiberglass dash completely out of the way. 2 that are visible when you open the door, and then the 2 on the bottom. And then beyond that, you just slide it up out of the way. Then that will give access to all of the different wiring that is back there behind the dash. You know, if you have to work on anything or, you know, diagnose any kind of problem, it's a lot easier to get the dashboard out of the way. And like other parts of this car, this will all be removable. You know, you can take the dash out, you can take the tree out, you can take all of that stuff out, and that's going to actually save a good bit of weight if Steve and Val want to take this thing and strip it down to, you know, as light as it can possibly get and take the thing racing. Like, the dash has absolutely no function in the car's performance. So I'm making it to where it can be completely removed and do so pretty easily. So there would be the 4 Zeus fasteners, and then there's the bolts in the X part of the door bars, and then we're going to actually tie this bar that I'm bending right now, we're going to tie it to the dash bar with 2 more bolts. So that kind of triangulates it, and you can see the threaded insert there on that, on the bottom of that bar. And then we machined some, I think they're about a 1/2 inch tall, and they're a 1/2 inch diameter, but they're real thick wall, so that a 1/4 inch bolt goes through the inside of it, and then it fits the 1/2 inch on the outside, and we're using a 1/2 inch piece of chromoly tubing that runs across the car there. And I'll admit to goofing this piece up. Like, this bar that I'm making, I do all this work, making it, getting it all to fit super nice in the car. And I get down, you know, when I measure it out, I make sure that the bar is a little bit longer than what I need it to be, because this is all hand fabricated. I'm not calculating this at all or measuring it out and putting it into the BendTech program like I've done on other parts of the roll cage. But I get this thing hand fabricated, fits super good on the one side. It's touching the Zeus plates that are riveted to the bottom of the dash. And I go and I cut the thing on one of my bend lines instead of my intended cut line. And now it's like an inch too short. So all the time that I put into making that piece, I get to redo it and make it again. Now, thankfully, because I had the first bar, you know, it's 97% perfect to what I need. It gives me a really good template for making the second bar, and I'll be able to use that first bar to make the pieces that are going to go up to the dash bar here in just a little bit. But, you know, sometimes when you're just not super focused on what you're doing, you make a mistake, and that mistake ends up costing you a lot of time. Now, the first one, you know, there's probably an hour, maybe even an hour and a half in tweaking and bending and making sure that the bends are in the same plane, all of that stuff. And the second one only took about, you know, probably 5 or 10 minutes to bend it up, because I already had all of the bends where I needed them to be. And so that really made it a heck of a lot easier to copy it, although it was still very frustrating because, you know, there's a part of me that really hates making mistakes, but sometimes it just happens and you can't focus on the mistake. You have to just keep pushing forward and keep getting work done, because otherwise if you try and get everything absolutely perfect, you're going to have some struggles. But you can see I've started to tack weld the bar, the crossbar, to the little spacers that are bolted to the jet nuts on that upper X bar. Now it's time to make the ones that go to the dash bar, and I'm just hand notching them with the grinder. For me, it's way faster just to grind on that a little bit with the grinder and get the fitment good enough to be able to weld it. And I mean, I don't show it all that great here, but it's not super hard to notch these, at least just a little bit. I might show some of my pattern for hand notching, or some of my methods for hand notching, in another video, because there's some kind of things you can watch for just to help with the notching process that I feel like simplifies it. And that's always one of the things that I struggle with when, you know, I'm doing these voiceovers or filming stuff for you guys, because in some ways I've done a lot of these things for so long that in some ways it's second nature, and I kind of just know what needs to be done. But then when I move to the process of actually trying to explain it in a way that it's understandable, you know, there's some thought process that goes into that. And I want to show you guys my process, whether or not, you know, certainly am I not saying that I think my way is the only way to do something, but you want to explain it to someone in a way that they understand it, so you don't just look dumb when I don't want to look dumb when I'm trying to explain things to you guys. But anyways, you know, it's not, I will admit that it isn't super well defined in this video as far as, you know, the up close tube notching and stuff. But you know, I was kind of in a rush to get this video filmed before I took off out of town, and we've moved on to the weight bars now, which right behind this camera, while CJ is fitting these and while I'm off camera, I'm actually welding this dash bar. Like, I unbolted it out of the car, took it to the bench, and welded up all of the pieces, or welded all of the joints that I couldn't get to while it was bolted into the car. And, you know, because it's a lot easier to weld stuff on the bench sometimes. So CJ's working on fitting that rear tab that goes between the door bar and the floor bar. That's going to be for the weight bar. And then in a second here, we'll bolt our mock-up weight bar to the rear tab, because right now that rear tab was only tacked, and then when I bolt the weight bar to it, it lets me just make sure that that back tab is straight and that the center line of the weight bar will be on the center line of the tube. And you could, if you were paying attention, you saw CJ put the weight bar, or the mock-up weight bar, on the outside of the tabs. Well, that will be a possibility with this car. You can run them on the outside or the inside or both. And the weight bar will not be as long as this mock-up piece is. That's just a piece of our box tubing that we keep over on the shelf. And actually that was welded into my chassis of my Cutlass just last week. So we cut it out, or I cut it out of my car and am using it. You know, we've repurposed it for another project on Steve and Val's car. So welding those tabs in now, and like I said, some of these things, like the weight bar tabs, they might not even get used on this car, but they're going to be in there because it's a heck of a lot easier to put them in now than it is to come back and do them after we've done all the powder coating or had the chassis powder coated in the car.
Well, hopefully that wasn't too hard to follow along with during the time lapse, but it's so much easier to make dash support bars when there is no firewall in the way. And yeah, for some cars, race cars, more racy race car stuff, obviously they don't have a dash in them, so you don't have to do all this stuff. And this is where the street car stuff starts adding up some weight. You know, there's a pound or two in there, pound or two or three, or 4 or 5 or 6 in the dash. So all that little bits of stuff is going to start adding some weight back to this thing. CJ and I also got the tabs in. This side is probably only half welded in. That side is 3/4 welded in. Front tab is completely done, but I can't weld the inside to that bar until the seat is out of the way. So on this side, I actually have the inside of it done, but not the outside of it, because we are wrapping up for the day. And I got to get out of here, go get all my stuff ready to leave tomorrow for Columbus, Ohio, to go to Mansfield, Ohio, where Mid-Ohio is at, to go crew chief Lee in the Viper at the Trans Am race. So that's going to wrap it up for this video. Appreciate everybody watching, subscribing, following along. We'll see you guys next time.